who stood out at the very start. Mansoor Saab is a rare combination of a person as a lawyer. He did high stakes commercial tax and civil matters, but at the same time, which is very rare, he was a pioneer in public interest litigation, which I hope he talks about. He's always had a passion for teaching. He spent 2 decades in teaching, public lecturing. He played a foundational role in establishing the law school at Lums. As a judge, he was elevated to the Lahore High Court in 2009, and then he was elevated to the Supreme Court. He is currently the senior puisne judge at the Supreme Court. Of course, at the High Court, he was also Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court, one of the most innovative Chief Justices which we have. It requires a separate session to deal with the measures he introduced. If you look at his jurisprudence, whether it is tax law or whether it's climate justice, I mean, there is voluminous jurisprudence and judgments. But I think his main passion is that he's a great believer and implementer of judicial reforms, and he's a internationally known jurist. He's a member of the Global Constitutionalism, Yale University. If in one sentence I describe his lifelong passion, I think, is to transform the Pakistani judiciary into a modern judiciary, which is both recognized and respected among the global comity of courts. Number 2, you have Justice Ayesha Malik, a Harvard graduate. During her time as a lawyer, she was one of our top commercial lawyers, also taught at various colleges, was elevated in the Lahore High Court in 2012, and then, as you all know, she was the first female judge at the Supreme Court. Now, usually that is how people refer to her and sadly reduce her. But that is not simply what Justice Ayesha is. She is one of our great dissenting judges at the Supreme Court, if you are familiar with her judgments. And that is reflected in the fact that in any case, she is one of the people who ask the most frequent questions from lawyers. Of course, the record for asking questions lays with Justice Mandukhail. I don't think anyone can break that. But I had the pleasure and the honor to appear before her. And her questions, of course, reflect a deep intellectualism, but it's always with a passionate overtone. She has a passion for the law, but always grounded in constitutional morality. If one looks at her jurisprudence, whether she's writing on commercial matters or environmental cases, it's the same intellectual rigor and passion. She's a published author, even outside the law. She's involved in pro bono work with various NGOs, especially on development issues, which shows her deep public commitment. The third panelist is Justice Jawad Hassan. In his time, also a prolific lawyer, presently a judge of the Lahore High Court since 2016, and of course, voluminous jurisprudence he's produced. And it's not simply that he decides a lot of cases, but you can see that this is a man who's very interested in developing the law. You can criticize his judgments, but there is one thing you can't say about Jawad Saab, that he is a boring person. So every day he produces a judgment. Of course, he's also passionate about public speaking and teaching, and is a published lawyer. What all three of them have in common is what I say are the 3 C's which every great judge must have: competence, creativity, courage, and conscience. So I see these 4 elements reflected both in their career and in their judgments, and I think that is what brings them to the subject of air pollution and climate change in general. They have a personal passion for environmental restoration and justice, and a deep constitutional and public commitment to this issue. So let me address the first question first to Mansoor Saab, and it's a generic question that what do you think are the contributions of the Pakistani judiciary on this issue of air pollution? And as I said, please start from, because one of the first and foremost cases on air pollution was a case which he did in his own name in 2007 as a lawyer. So, Mansoor Saab.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous kind of introduction, also very kind of you. And thank you, Dawn, for having us over. So the story actually, for people who don't know how judiciary has been interfering or looking at air pollution or environmental issues, the story actually in the context of air pollution would begin about 3 decades ago. One of our iconic judges from the Supreme Court, Justice Salim Akhtar, and I need to mention his name because he really got it all started. And this was in 1993 that he took up a case about vehicular pollution in Karachi, 93. And the direction was given that year that the cars ought to be inspected, we need to work on our fuel, we need to have proper maintenance and inspection systems for vehicles in Karachi in order to address the air pollution. Nothing much came about. Later on, a major landmark decision comes in 1994, which sets the tone for environmental movement in Pakistan, and that's the Shah case, not directly related to air pollution. It was about a grid station being set up in Islamabad and how that grid station was unhealthy for people, residents of the area, and that judgment for the first time says that right to life would mean right to a better, healthier life. So that sets the tone for the environmental movement in the country. In that backdrop, I was then a practicing lawyer, and I was teaching at LUMS, and my LUMS class became petitioners, and we went to the court, the Lahore High Court, on a case relating to air pollution in 1997. And we said the vehicular air pollution ought to be addressed because it is creating a number of health effects on people, and we need to do something about it. At that time, the judiciary did not understand. They thought this was a fancy litigation. We weren't given that respect with that petition, and that petition kept pending for good 9 years at the High Court. Because the judges were not with it, they did not understand. They thought this was just a, some fancy thing that he's talking about, and they said, let's attend to some criminal cases first, and let's attend to some civil cases. We'll come to your case later. And it kept, pending for a long time. However, after 9 years, it got decided, and it led to a number of interesting things that happened in that case. For the first time, vehicular air pollution was considered and recognized as a source of air pollution, one of the major sources of air pollution. It was that judgment that had some successes. We got rid of the 2-stroke rickshaw and moved on to 4-stroke rickshaw. That's the time when we moved on to CNG buses instead of the regular buses that were there. And there were certain other directions of getting rid of old buses and, whatnot. So a series of directions were given way back in 1997 when it started, but much later the decision came in 2007, and those directions, some of them were partly accepted. The point that I'm trying to make is that once the case is going on, the spotlight is on the government, they are very active, they come and respond to things, and they did in this case, and I must give them credit that they did. But then everything withers away. Once the case is decided, the decision is passed, things wither away. Similarly, in another case, some successes, Dungi ground, if anybody is familiar with Lahore, there was this famous Dungi ground, which is on MM Alam Road. I don't know if the young ones know this or not, next to the Zouk restaurant, if that makes any sense. There's a huge ground called Dungi ground, and that was like a park for the residents of the area. And the government of the day wanted to set up an IMAX cinema and a shopping mall on that Dungi ground. And we went up in public interest litigation at that time saying, you can't take away parks which are in the city because they are the living lungs of the city. They are carbon sinks, you see, and they regulate your air pollution. And eventually that case kept pending for a while also, and there was a lot of politics to it also. It finally got decided, and we retained the Dungi Park. If you still remember, Dungi ground is still a Dungi ground. It's still a park. No shopping mall came up, except they allowed an underground parking to that park, but they retained the park, saying the park is important and we should keep it. So the idea was that there have been successes by the court, but at the same time, there have been disappointments also in the court. There was a time when we took up a case, if you probably know, Kalar Kahar is a beautiful valley if you come on the motorway, and now there are some cement plants set up in that valley. So we went up in public interest litigation saying that you cannot set up an industry, and in particular a cement plant, in a valley, because you can't do that because of the temperature inversion. The hot air remains in the valley and destroys the area. It doesn't go out of the valley. And in India, in Dehradun, they had shut down cement factories in Dehradun, saying you can't set up industries in a valley. However, at that time when we went to the court, at that time, this was way back in 2005, I think, and the first thing that the judge asked me was, "Aapka ghar hai? Do you have a house of your own?" I said, "No, I live with my family, my parents." They said, "Phir aapko kya pata cement kya hota hai?" and dismissed the case, you see. And that was how the case just went out of the court. But 30 years later, regarding the same Kalar Kahar, a case comes up to the court where we interfered and stopped the further expansion of a cement plant in Kalar Kahar. So, I mean, there have been successes and there have been some disappointments also as we went along. But on the whole, answering the question, I think the judiciary has been rather, and since then, when I came onto the bench, we took up matters which were relating to smog in particular. 2017 is a case to mention. It was all about smog, and AQIs that were hitting the roof at that time, and we had declared, the court declared an emergency, an health emergency in 2017. And with the consensus of the government at that time, came up with the entire plan on how to address smog in the city. All those recommendations are still recorded, part of the literature, but never got implemented. So in the end, I would like to say that the judiciary has been very active. Even recently, there have been cases from the Supreme Court where we shut down about 700 stone crushing units, destroying air pollution across KP. And we said, where are your filtration plants? How come you got an EIA approved? And how are you doing all this? And we shut it down with the permission that if they put the proper filtration plants and the appropriate mechanism and get their proper EIA approved, they could come forward. So what comes out of the whole thing is that the courts have been very robustly directing and pushing the government to take care and address the issue of air pollution as well as climate change, because to the courts, people matter. What really matters is the fundamental rights of the people, especially those who can't really come forward to the courts directly. So the courts have gone out repeatedly protecting an ordinary person and their fundamental rights. That's the toolkit for us. That's the prime consideration that the judge has, to protect the fundamental rights of an ordinary person. And we build a whole corpus of jurisprudence, which, authors are sitting next to me, regarding air pollution and climate change. However, the problem is that it never gets actualized, and there's a huge gap between the jurisprudence and the reality on the ground. 97 was the first petition I took to court. 2025, air pollution can't be worse in the city. What's going on? What's missing? It's governance, it's governance, it's governance, and I see there's nothing else.
Your Ladyship, the same question to you.
So, like we've been told that, the right to clean air, we recognize it and have recognized it decades ago as a fundamental right, which means that we recognize the fact that for any citizen, for any person, in order to live their life in a healthy manner, to live their life with dignity, this is fundamental that they get clean air. So the question is that what do we do after we've declared the rights? Well, we've gone on to look at, which is an area that I have focused on particularly, is to look at the regulatory, the regulator, the regulatory setup, and where are the gaps. And there are many gaps. And when you start looking at the gaps, you try to work with the regulator to sort of help them understand where their gaps are and how they should manage themselves. So for example, in Lahore, when I was in the High Court, there were a lot of cases related to brick kilns and poultry farms. Now one would think poultry farm is just a small farm, what's wrong with that? But poultry farms create air pollution. There is so much emission and odor that comes out of the waste over there that it became an issue that there were a lot of litigants coming to court to say that we are not allowed to set up our poultry farm in this area or that area, or residents coming up to say that the poultry farm is just 100 meters away from our residence and we have to breathe this stenching air. In the same way, brick kilns, they are all over, they emit a lot of pollution, and yet the regulator was unable to control the pollution, which is why litigants come to court, either public interest litigation, residents of the area, but more importantly, it is the owners of these kilns or these poultry farms that are coming to court also to say that the regulator is being unfair with us and is imposing unfair regulation. So that's when you realize that for a person doing business, they also need to understand that they have to mitigate whatever the emissions and the pollution they're causing. They have to be conscious of that, and that lies in again, that's part of the job of the executive. Before it gives out licenses, it must ensure that this aspect of the matter is looked at. In the same way, judges look at cases and try to sort of carve out a relief for the person before the court. And the story continues even today. So when we were looking at cases in the Supreme Court, when it's related to floods, whether it's related to surface mining, whether it's related to deforestation, the issues are the same. It's about the way the regulator is handling the matter. So I would say in a very sort of relaxed way. You know, there's no urgency over there. You don't feel that urgency. You don't feel that level of commitment where they realize that the air people are breathing is toxic, and it's actually a health hazard. So there is a problem there, and you try to work with them to help them develop guidelines. I can give two very interesting examples of when I was a judge in the High Court. Residents of an area came to say that right next to us, there's a garbage dumping disposal site. It's right next to where we live, and every day we have to breathe that air. There are mosquitoes there, there are dogs there. It's a problem, and then you can imagine as the garbage pile becomes bigger and bigger. So the response of the government was that yes, we recognize this fact that there is a dumping site, but we're waiting for our project to sort of develop, to mature, for our funding to come in, and then we will work on it, which is a 5-year plan. So for 5 years, in their books, there was no short-term arrangement for the 5 years in which they were hoping the project will mature. So again, the question is that have you not thought about short-term arrangements? Have you not thought about what to do during the time that you're building the capacity of the garbage disposal site? And the answer was that no, we don't have a policy. So the court then nudged them in that direction. They go back and come up with a policy that will deal with the issue during the time that the ultimate project is completed. In the same way for drinking water. In the same way, in a case which involved culling of dogs. And the problem there was that the carcass was just left on the street. So again, you get the societies coming, public coming to say that it smells, it stinks, the air we breathe is very difficult. It's thick with that odor and that contamination. And again, the question was, what do the municipalities do? You want to kill the dog, which in itself is wrong as well, but you don't have an arrangement to deal with the carcass, you don't know what to do with it, then why are you killing the dog in the first case? Secondly, this problem is not attending to just the culling. What is the dog doing? You know, they're going to garbage sites. So why aren't we dealing with those, which is again a contributor? So really the answer to your question is that the jurisprudence for the judge evolves when the problems keep coming before them. And the nature and the variety of the problems that at least I have seen, that we have seen together, they show us that there is a big gap. There is a big gap where enforcement and implementation is concerned. And I would say that's probably our biggest challenge, enforcement and implementation.
Thank you, Ji. Jawad sir.
I'll share some good things for how the judiciary has led its way on protecting the environment and air pollution. 53 years ago, our constitution, we had a constitution, and Pakistan never had right to environment in this constitution. It took us almost a couple of years that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, inshallah Wabda, PLD 94 Supreme Court has held the right to life under Article 9, means to right to a healthy environment. And after 1994, I must share that we are very lucky that to do 26th Amendment, that Article 9A was inserted in the Constitution. 9A is now Pakistan, every citizen has a right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment in the Constitution now, which is a fundamental right. Coming back to the issue of air pollution, Pakistan judiciary has always led the way internationally on its judgments, what implications are. I'll share two judgments as a lawyer, specifically on air pollution. The first was Anjum Irfan versus LDA,
Thank you, Jawad sir. So the first question was a celebratory question, but now let me come to a much more critical question. What is the problem, people want to understand? What is the problem? Why can't we solve this problem? It seems that when this question is asked, everyone starts pointing fingers at the other. Now, what people in general are not interested in either the legislature celebrating that we've given you a fundamental right, or the judiciary celebrating that we've given you these principles of environmental justice, or the executive taking out full-page ads saying that we've done this. Fault. So as they want to understand the problem, as I said, as Ghalib said, that Ibn Maryam hua kare koi, mere dukh ki dawa kare koi. So what is the problem in terms of, is it a legislative problem? Is it a judicial problem? Is it an executive problem? Or is this society just not able to see the challenge which air pollution poses?
So, do I go first?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So, on a lighter note first, for Justice Jawad Hassan, I mean, at the Supreme Court, we change the white shirt every day. That helps. You don't have to wait for 5 days and make it, wait till it gets dirty. Anyway, that's just a tip from the Supreme Court.
That is because of other problems that the
So having said that, in the second comment that Justice Jawad made that the government has woken up, I think that's totally wrong, and I'll explain. So if you look at the 20 years or 30 years of experience of doing public interest litigation and deciding matters, if I were to identify the problems, first problem is more, you talked about legislature, I think the first problem is constitutional. The subject of pollution has now been devolved to the provinces. There is no national domain to oversee the whole problem at a national level. So I think there's a huge disconnect at the federal level and the provincial level, and I think this can be resolved through something called cooperative federalism, because the federal government will have to play a role in laying down policy or standards, and then execution has to come to the provinces. So there is a bit of a disconnect as far as federal government and provincial governments are concerned, and devolution of pollution is a problematic area which needs to be addressed. But that was legislative problem. Coming on to the executive issue, I think largely what I've, I share my experience as a judge for all these years, is that I don't think the government is interested in changing the life of an ordinary person. It is all elitist. Everything that is done is elitist to satisfy or to protect an industry or perhaps a pressure group, but an ordinary person is not in the picture. So that's what I've realized, that the ordinary person is not relevant. So air pollution, go deal with it yourself. We don't really care. Let's just go build industry. Let's do something else. I'm not saying development is bad. Development ought to have been done, should be done, but there has to be intelligent ways of doing it. So let's see how we do it. Executive is the gatekeeper to projects, right? So who controls projects? That is done by Environmental Protection Agency. It says, sorry, you can't set up this project, or you can set up this project, and there's this thing called environmental impact assessment. That's the gatekeeper. You say, sorry, this is not environmentally friendly, we don't allow you this project. But EPAs of the world are what? EPA of Pakistan is a department of the government, and it's fully captured by the government. There's a judgment called Imrana Tiwana which says there's a total regulatory capture. Do you think that EPA is going to tell the provincial government that this project we cancel, we don't allow this project to take off? Do you think that's possible? So what are we doing? I mean, we're fooling ourselves. We have an EPA that is a subservient department to the government. How could it oppose government's will and wishes? Number one. Second, have a look at the people running EPA. Who are those people? What kind of degrees do they hold in environment, in science? What do they hold? We have no clue. I mean, how they get transferred? Who's running EPA? Look at their capacity sometimes, and then you'll figure out why things are going wrong. Then let's look at our bureaucracy, and no disrespect to, we have friends there also. A secretary gets appointed as Secretary Environment. He's come from some other department for a couple of months. He has not got through any special training on environment. He has no understanding what the problem is. He's just there for a couple of months. He doesn't know when he gets transferred. What do you expect him to sit down and make a policy out of, for you on how to resolve air pollution in Punjab? Do you think he has the energy and the time and the expertise to do that? So what are we really doing? We're fooling ourselves. There's a department called Environment Department. There's an EPA. I think they don't know anything about anything, and we've seen that happen in the court. With great respect to Malik Shah Sahab sitting here, Jawad Hassan has been praising him, and I praise him too. He's been a very good officer. But I'm saying as an institution, I'm talking about a generic thing. Our institutions, our regulators have failed, and they don't have the capacity to do anything. That's the second thing. The third thing, civil society sitting right in front of me. It's dead. Where are the public interest litigation? You're going to sit at home and crib about air pollution? You're going to sit at home and talk about climate change? When have you come out to file petitions? When have you gone out protesting? Civil societies that are dead, this happens to them. See, so live with the air pollution that you have, because you haven't done much, to my mind. You should be more active. You should have come to courts, pursued cases, fight for your right. If you don't want to fight for your right, nobody's going to bother about you. So you're actually sitting at home doing nothing. So civil society is weak, regulatory functions are weak, government is not interested in people, and now coming to the judiciary. Now judiciary, as far as environment is concerned, is a niche litigation. You know, you have some judges running this show. 3 of us sitting here, maybe 1 or 2 others. The whole corpus of judiciary doesn't know what we're talking about, frankly, because a lot of judges don't know much about the environment or the climate change, and whenever any issue arises, say, Mansoor se baat kar lena, climate ka sawal aa gaya hai, go talk to Justice Ayesha, it's about climate. What is this? I mean, do you think the most serious existential threat Pakistan is facing, there can't be a more serious threat to Pakistan than climate change right now, or air pollution, and we're not bothered? And we are looking at this as a very fancy concept. So I think within the judiciary, we need to enlarge the scope. Most of our judges need to understand this, building capacity. We need to understand that this is a serious fundamental right issue, nothing to do with the environment in that sense, but a fundamental right issue which we must address. So that's the judicial function. Executive function is the major function which is lacking to my mind. There is, as I said earlier, a serious governance issue. And then coupled with a nice, relaxed civil society, good luck. Enjoy the air pollution. Thank you.
Justice Ayesha, if I may just add, because one has seen in your work that you've moved on to basically monitoring and compliance by the government. So could you please also talk about this regulatory capture issue?
So as I said, I think one of the biggest issues and the biggest challenges we face is enforcement and implementation of the law and of the policies that are made. As I understand it, and what my experience from the bench is, that we treat air pollution and environment issues as inconveniences. And today we fail to recognize the fact that air pollution actually is a public health emergency. It is nothing less than a public health emergency, which if we don't understand the impact it is having for the generations to come, we won't be able to resolve the issue, we won't be able to save the generations to come. I think what's also important to understand is that when we say governance is an issue, and as you asked, it's important to understand, at least as a court, what I expect when someone brings a case to me. And when I ask the government, all right, what are the steps you've taken? What is your response? What do I expect? What do I need? Well, for one thing, there's a policy and the law. You've brought that before me. But where is the monitoring under that policy? Where is the reporting? Where is the data on the basis of which decisions were made? Where is Where are all those reports that you have relied upon to look at on the basis of which you thought a project was relevant or viable, or on the basis of which you are able to say this will not impact the air pollution, this will not impact the air that we breathe? So I think there's a big problem there because we're weak on reporting and monitoring. We tick boxes, but we don't follow through. And without reporting and monitoring, without developing data, it's a science now. It's not what I think or you think, it's a science. You need the science, and without the science, you cannot control the problem. The second issue is that everything that is done is reactive. First the problem, then you react. There is no planning. You don't see long-term planning. You don't see that this issue has been thought through. Today, the air that you breathe has become a commodity. It's become a commodity that is affordable for those who have the ability to buy the air filters, the humidifiers, the masks, and who can actually clean and filter the air that they breathe. And what does that do? That creates more disparity. That makes it becomes the fact that now society, again, there is this injustice, this inequality, because everyone doesn't have the ability to filter the air that they breathe. So if this is what has happened, that the air that you breathe has become a commodity now. For those who are able to clean it for themselves, they're okay, or relatively okay, but not for the ones, the vulnerable people, or the masses of the people who can't even afford the potted plants that allegedly clean the air to some extent. So this is a big issue. And in governance, you need regular reporting, monitoring, you need data, you need capacity. Where is the capacity building? If even today we're still looking at this as a specialized institution, then we've misunderstood the impact, we've misunderstood the relevance. It's no longer specialized. The environment and climate change is something everyone has to know about. Everyone has to understand it, and it has to factor in every decision making. You can't take decisions without factoring in the environment. It is relevant, it is very relevant. And I think I also would like to address the youth. The people for whom this is being done. What is the air that you want to breathe in your tomorrow? What is the Pakistan that you want to see tomorrow? So what is the youth doing with its education, with its ability to write and to speak? Where is your expertise? Because we lack in the expertise as well. You don't see the academia churning out information, churning out reports and articles on it. You don't see the youth also paying attention to this. It's easy to criticize, but it's difficult to become a part of the solution, which is what the youth should be looking at, that if you want your rights, if you want that right to clean air to actually become clean air, you have to see what your role is going to be in that. Be it in whether you're just simply writing, or you're speaking out, or you're protesting, or you're bringing litigation to courts, what are you doing? And what are the steps that you are taking in order to ensure that you get that right? I would also like to say that we need to invest, when we need to realize that all problems require money. So there has to be will to invest in this issue of environment, of climate change, of the air that you breathe. This is something that requires a lot of investment. So if we're just going to put aside a little bit of money and do a little bit of things and tick boxes again, it's not going to control it. I mean, most people have to have antihistamines and medication for their breathing, and we become a nation full of asthmatic people because the air that you breathe is so toxic that it's very difficult. It's difficult to function. And in another month, sitting in Lahore, breathing in Lahore, and in many other cities will become difficult. I drive down to Lahore every weekend, and you can see that thick, dense air. The minute you enter in that vicinity in Punjab, you can see the thick, dense air. That's what you are breathing. So for governance is an issue. Governance requires monitoring, data, capacity building, resource. And if I have to underscore everything, I'd say it requires will and commitment. We have to recognize this is not an inconvenience, but a fundamental right that everybody deserves.
Thank you, Jawad Sahab, especially since you're the most optimistic about the government on this panel. I think the answers pose a challenge for you.
I fixed it in the Amal Sukera because the best way to do it, there are laws, and if you look at the Constitution of Pakistan, there is a tradition and there's a provincial government. So in Amal Sukera, what I did not ask the EPA to do this, I asked the Secretary to do this. So the Constitution of Pakistan under Article 90 says there will be a federal government which functions under Article 99 under federal government rules of business. And the Ministry of Climate Change is a Schedule 1, and there is a minister and a secretary's obligation to implement the laws. In the case of Amal Sukera, in my last paragraph, I mentioned that the provincial government of Punjab under Schedule 1 has the Environmental Protection Department, and EPA is the autonomous body attached with the EPA. You cannot ask EPA to do because you are all under the secretary, which is under Rule 10 of the Punjab Government Rules of Business 2011, which says that secretary shall be the head of the department and responsible for its efficient and administrative measures to adopt and implement the law. So I ask that we can go straight to the secretary under Doctrine of Sovereignty, under Rule 4, under the Federal Rules of Business, and Rule 10 of the provincial government. And when I ask the secretary to submit the report, check from the EPA, check from the DG, check from everyone what step you've taken, because you are then under the constitutional obligation of Article 4. Article 4 of the Constitution provides an inalienable right of every citizen to be treated as per law. Inalienable is my birthright to have clean air, clean water. Roti kapda makan is because of my kismet. So clean air is my right, which is like the concept of the public trust doctrine of common law, that these are sources that belong to, we are a trustee of God on this universe. I must acknowledge, Muhammad Yahya Mo is sitting here, that Pakistan was being the biggest beneficiary of the donors and help, whatever we've done. As you can see, IUCN has the largest office in Pakistan. WWF has the largest office outside Geneva in Pakistan. We had been approached by lots of donors, have been working in Pakistan environment, and whatever we have done, more or less, is because of the donor coming to Pakistan. Your UNICEF project is also looking at the environment sides now. We are always grateful because when we do good work, you come to us, and we always execute. Government is doing their work, Judiciary is doing their work, and we, when three of us was in Baku in last November, and this question came to us and the panel together in a COP29, my answer was that Judiciary has been in forefront. Pakistan Judiciary got together, the entire 7 SAARC countries. We are all collectively called Bourbon Declaration. They sat down with 7 Chief Justices in Bourbon on 23rd of April 2012. They declared a Bourbon Declaration on the Supreme Court website that within a month we will establish green tribunals. They did. There are lots of judgments coming to all Sindh, Punjab, KPK environmental tribunal. Green benches, green magistrates, and green judiciary. That was done. Then Supreme Court again convened a huge conference and came out with a declaration on water declaration. That happened in 20th October 2018. I've never seen the largest amount of crowd under one roof 2 days from 9 to 11 p.m. at night. People from the age of 18 to the age of 95 were sitting all day. Even Syed Babar Ali, who was now 99, he must have been 95 at that time. Jamali Sahab, Zafullah Jamali, everybody came and talked about Pakistan water. That was the commitment of the Supreme Court coming out with water declaration of 10 points. Last year, this is Shah and this is Ayesha, Malik, and we all had the huge conference on climate justice at the Supreme Court on 8th of June 2024. We came out with a vision what Pakistan Judiciary should do. We are seeking help from the capacity building. We are looking at partners to involve the advocates, to train them, the tribunals, the civil judiciary, the lot sitting here. We are looking at more things because we are all need funds. And we, judges are all there. We have few judges more coming in, looking at us. And that was a very important conference last year at the Supreme Court, where I must say, because of Justice Shah, Justice Ayesha Malik, the entire diplomats were sitting all day. The ambassador of Azerbaijan, sat with us because we were going to his country. Everybody sat with us because they know the importance of that subject. That shows the seriousness of the donors for us. That shows the seriousness of the foreign help we getting. That shows the Pakistan judiciary pioneering, leading the environment in the world. That shows Pakistan government woken up and walking fastly now. That is the positive side of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jawad Hassan Saab, always optimistic. But the people of Pakistan ask, tere waade pe jiye hum, to ye jaan jhoot jana, khushi se na mar jata, jo e'tabar hota. So the fact is that, yes, there are contributions, there are problems, but I want to stick to the judiciary. And what would you suggest as a way forward for the judiciary, focusing on the judiciary? And here I'm talking about both jurisprudence. I'm talking about, does the judiciary require any institutional reforms itself in terms of its focus on the environment? Does it require education in terms of scientific knowledge? And because it is such an emergent problem, any timelines?
Well, we all require a fresh white shirt every day. That's one. Well, just purely judicial reforms, well, yes, there has to be capacity building. Judges need to understand climate better. They need to understand environmental science better. And as rightly pointed out by Justice Ayesha, and perhaps Jawad also mentioned it, science is critical, and I'll just come to that in a second. So we need to be upgraded on that science issue also. And I think in future we need to start looking at climate courts, and I'll come to that also. It's very interconnected, why we should have climate courts in the future. So there is a number of things that we need to be doing within the judiciary as far as building capacity to deal with environmental issues and climate change issues once we get done with some of our constitutional issues which are on our minds these days. But once we do that, I think there is a lot of work to be done at our end. And I think more judges ought to get involved and mainstreamed into the process of dealing with environment. But I think if you were to look at the whole spectrum and you look at the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, I think the problem isn't that much of the judiciary. For the last, excuse me, for the last 30 years, we've been at it. We're coming up with one of the most robust judgments, which are internationally now hailed. They're fine. They're giving all the best principles there are. The disconnect is not the implementation part and where the executive doesn't follow what we are saying. So that coordination needs to be built. And let me just give you a story which is very important, it highlights the problem. 30 years ago, they decided, WASA, you're probably aware of WASA, the Water and Sanitation Agency in Punjab, decided to put up a filtration plant next to River Ravi because the industrial waste, contaminated water was going into Ravi and contaminating River Ravi 30 years ago. And for that, in order to set up a filtration plant, they acquired the land of residents of the area because they wanted to set up a plant. And this is a recent case of the Supreme Court, by the way. It comes to us at the Supreme Court 30 years later, and the residents of the area come forward. And they say, sir, they have taken my land 30 years ago to set up a filtration plant. There is no filtration plant there, even today. Please give my land back so I can do some agriculture or do whatever. So we start looking into it and we ask the government, what's the problem? River Ravi in 30 years would have been dead by now because all the contaminated water is going into it. What have you done? And they said, sir, the World Bank hasn't given us the money and we are working on it. I said, that's great. 30 years ago, you've been working with the World Bank to get, they said, so we moved on to another donor, then we moved on to another donor, and now currently we are renegotiating with the World Bank to give us, I don't know how many $1 billion to set up the filtration plant. So the judgment actually says that this $1 billion is not going to come your way. There is no way this is going to come your way. So you should have done something on your own. So that brings us to something very critical, and I want to underline that if you do not have finance, you cannot address these issues. And one of the major issues which the government faces is finance. Other than strategy, thinking, planning, and a number of other things, they don't have the finance allocated for this purpose. So we went ahead and said you should have found homegrown solutions for this contamination. You should have found ways of dealing with contaminated water rather than waiting for the World Bank to give you $1 billion. So the judgment talks about thinking of your own homegrown solutions to address this problem. And I tell you, that is the answer. For climate change, for air pollution, start thinking about homegrown solutions. Nothing is going to come from outside, one. Number two, the funding part. We need to think of, and there are bankers here maybe, the Islamic financing, the Sukuk bonds, and whatnot. There's a lot of things that we can do internally, domestically. So we need to raise climate finance to deal with all these issues, or raise finance internally to deal with these issues. So in this judgment, we have said that climate finance is now as good as a fundamental right, because if you do not have climate finance, there is no way you can address adaptation in this country, and everything is going to be an elusive dream. It will not happen. The other aspect that I want to highlight is that, for example, we all understand that climate change and air pollution, they're interlinked, so I interchangeably use the terms, is the most serious existential threat in the country. There can't be a more serious threat. And I was kind of disappointed that the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister weren't even there to even come to attend this event to tell us what their plans are. Maybe they were busy, but that shows what interest they would have as far as climate change and air pollution is concerned, where millions of people are getting affected. So what we did was, a case comes to the Supreme Court saying, the law comes in 2017, and Rumina is sitting here. 2017, the Climate Change Act comes to Pakistan, and it says there has to be an authority that deals with climate change. The case comes to us in 2024, and a petitioner in a public interest says, there is no authority, sir. The only serious existential threat the country is facing, and the only law which says there has to be an apex authority dealing with climate change, there is no authority. The act was passed in 2017. So we called them, we asked the government, and I think even today, the authority is yet not functional in spite of our directions, one. Number two, the most important thing that is provided in the act is that there has to be a climate change fund. We asked them, and they very frankly said, not a single penny lies in that fund. So what are they doing? What kind of allocations are the budgetary allocations are there for air pollution? We don't know. So I'm just sharing my experience in the courtroom with you. When we ask them, what is the budget allocation for air pollution? They look at you. When you ask them, what's their budget allocation for climate change? They look at you. So we, as you know, it's commonsensical. If there is no budget, what's the plan? So there is no plan. And if there's no plan, things they will go on the way they go on. So my concern would more largely be, other than the judicial reforms that we should do and improve our capacity to deal with things, I think there has to be a mechanism for the government and the judiciary to work together and understand how they need to resolve these issues which relate to the ordinary person. And I think that is the critical issue which is missing. I think, once again, I go back to the same word. I think governance is a very serious issue. And as I see it in the last 30 years, there has been a lack of interest of governance as far as air pollution or climate change is concerned, and the results are in front of us. So that is the real area to work on, and how to build capacity within the government to attend to this issue, and how to bring in that political will to deal with these issues, because unless there is political will to address these issues, they're not going to be addressed. We can't, as court, run governments We can't fix air pollution. We can't fix climate change. It's not our job. We lay down principles. We nudge the government to do it. They have to do it. And the second aspect is certainly that the civil society needs to be far more active to do something about it.
Thank you, sir. The time is nearly over, so if you could, your ladyship, take 2 minutes and specifically address the problem.
That's right.
That are you engaging in the myth of Sisyphus as far as the government is concerned, that you're trying to enforce something which is really unenforceable through these executive authorities?
So your question was, what can the judiciary do? I think the judiciary has been playing its part. It can recognize a right, it can declare a right, and it can then look at whether that right is being enforced or not. Today, what has changed, I think, in looking at the right is that it's no longer just the right to clean air or the right to breathe clean air. Now it's a cluster of rights. So you are looking at the right to be healthy, your physical well-being. It involves the right to, is the right information being given? Are people being informed properly? Is awareness about teaching people about risks and responsibilities, or is it merely an advertisement? So there is a cluster of rights. We have to look at the issue of pollution, of air pollution, climate change, the environment as a whole, and look at the cluster of rights, the incidental rights that are connected to the actual right itself, because it's going down to the way we live our life. So that's important. It's also important to remember that the judiciary can't bring about behavior change. It can't change the mindset. What it can do is it can keep writing and it can keep pushing the issue and telling people where all the problems lie. But the mindset has to change when people themselves realize the urgency of the matter, when people themselves realize how important the issue is. So having dialogue is great and engaging in dialogue is great, but the thing to ask is, what did you discuss last year and what are you discussing this year? So if this was my courtroom, that's the first question I'd ask. All right, from last year to this year, what difference has been made? Can you tell us what difference has been made? Because the air quality index does not tell me that there is a difference. The air quality index is so chronic that it's not breathable anymore. And I don't think that we would be looking at, policies and laws at this stage. It's a health emergency. So the judiciary has to also recognize the cluster of rights. The judiciary has to understand that this is no longer a standalone environment issue. It affects everything. So every case can have an aspect of the environment, of air pollution related to it. So we have to also be more hands-on. Apart from the training and the capacity, a little more hands-on, more sort of in connection with what is happening. And I think most important is the answer to the problem is not with the judiciary.
Just a minute, sir.
So
ultimatums are
1 minute. The answer is climate finance. Pakistan was very lucky in the COP28 became a member of the Loss and Damage Fund. Zafar Masood sir बैठे में, the Bank of Punjab, we are doing a lot of work on climate finance, and this is the issue because we can't depend on the loan from Jeff and other countries. Pakistan is now looking into SCCP as the guidelines. State Bank, we are working on that. This is a good news, and as you can see, I can verify that first time, because of good work of judiciary has done, UNICEF, Abdullah Fadil had an MOU with the FJA, Child Justice Project. First time it's happened where the UN is partnering with the judiciary on a project which is going very well. This shows the Pakistan's positive impact on everyone. You can see this as a role, and my answer could be that we need funding and we need climate finance, and we have a framework now. Finance Minister is working on it. We'll have a meeting very soon on that. Thank you.
very good that we end on this optimistic note, but on this optimistic note by Mr. Jawad Hassan, but sir दोबारा गालिब याद आता है कि हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, लेकिन दिल के खुश रखने को गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very incredible and informative session. We truly appreciate you all taking out the time to be here. We will now be moving towards a 30-minute break for lunch, after which we will continue our program.